Do you know why you wanted to become an astronaut?
It, I guess, was the epitome of the perfect job for a fighter pilot or a test pilot. It enables you to go faster, higher, further. And I think that is what my life was all about. If there was an opportunity to try and do something, I wanted to try and do it.
Well, you were selected for the last Gemini flight, which was very successful, and then you were selected for the Apollo, for the first Apollo moon landing. How did that come about now?
Well, in between the two missions, I was on the backup crew for Apollo 8, which was the first flight that orbited around the moon, if you remember Christmas in 1968. Neil Armstrong and I were on the backup crew for that mission. And shortly after that, there were two more missions necessary before the first landing mission could take place. And the way that the rotation of crews went, we knew that there would be at least that many before we might be on as a primary crew. And it turned out just right that we waited two missions and were on Apollo 11, and Apollo 11 was selected to be the first landing mission. Really, the point I'm trying to make is that we were fortunate by just being in the right place at the right time, rather than any specific quality that either Neil or I or Mike Collins had to single us out as being more desirable than anyone else was for that flight. We were just lucky.
Now, the three astronauts who were going on the first moon land, not the first moon landing, but on the first orbit around the moon, they all perished while waiting on the launching pad. There was a flash fire. When it came to your turn to lie on the launching pad and wait to go up into the atmosphere, were you not a bit apprehensive?
We were fighter pilots, we were test pilots, and if we were uncomfortable with dangerous adventures, dangerous portions of the mission, if we were uncomfortable with the point that an engine might fail on an airplane shortly after takeoff, you'd get out of that business. You wouldn't stay in it. So we learned that there was really no place for apprehension and fear in our business.
Did you never allow yourself to think, well, we're going on a trip which nobody's ever been on before, we may never get there, and even if we get there, we may never come back? Didn't you think this?
Well, it's rather hard to recall exactly what was going through your mind at a lot of times, but I do remember some time when we were on the surface of the moon, and I think actually when we were outside, the sort of nebulous thought coming to me that here were two people obviously further away from home in terms of the necessary things that were required to get them back home. Two people further away from home than two people have ever been before, but they're probably more human beings watching and paying attention to our very movements right this moment than any people have been before. And that's sort of an unusual...
You were aware of that, were you, at the time?
I certainly was, yes. I was quite aware throughout the entire mission that we were on center stage to a degree, that we were being watched. And I think both of us were conscious of the extraordinary responsibility that was on our shoulders to carry out the mission correctly and to make sure that if there were things that would prevent us from successfully completing the mission, that they would not be things that would be our fault in case they went wrong.
And when you were walking about on the moon, when you took those first hesitant steps, was anything different to what you expected it would be?
It was very unusual the way the dust would not cloud and would go out, radiate around, and then hit the ground. It had not occurred to me, nor to other people, I guess, that it would be difficult to tell when we were standing perfectly upright. It was also very clear to see, looking out toward the horizon, that we were not on a flat, level terrain. No one could ever make a statement that the moon is flat the way that people thought that the Earth was flat. It was very obvious that it curved away. I was a little surprised when in the midst of our initial activities on the surface, Houston Control Center called and told us to stand by for a minute, that the president wanted to talk to us on the phone. And, but it struck me as a little bit unusual that we would stop doing what we were doing to have a conversation with the president.
And then when you saw the Earth as this small blue ball miles and miles away, did you have any new thoughts about it?
I don't think so. We had kept in our minds for many years that we might one time in our lives be in this situation. And I think once selected for the mission, we had a lot of time to think about what our thoughts might be. And I don't recall any spur-of-the-moment unusual thoughts. It did occur to me that as I looked up to see the Earth, that it was very small, even though intellectually I knew that it was 4 times larger in the sky than the moon appears to us at night. It still, since that was home, it looked rather small and a long ways away.
Well, you all got back to a terrific welcome on Earth, and then the president sent you off in his plane to go around, I think, something like 45 days in 26 countries in 45 days. How did that work out for you and your wife, because she had to go along too?
That was a very hectic period. It was 45 days visiting about 25 different cities. And the whole idea of being involved in a press conference or airport welcoming remarks or appearing at a men's luncheon, Rotary Club, something like that, preparing to be able to say what I felt the people wanted to hear, many times was just a very prolonged agony for me. So much depended on just how much of an extrovert, how good you were at being comfortable discussing things in front of an audience. If that made you feel comfortable, you were a hit. If it didn't make you feel comfortable, then I feel that you were in for a rough time and a lot of agonizing moments. You see, I didn't feel like I was ideally suited in that role. I felt that as an engineer, as an academic person, as a fighter pilot, I was suited to that profession. As an astronaut, I worked well. As a public figure, I didn't care for that role, and I didn't care for the way I felt I performed in that role.
Didn't you say to your wife at one moment, we're never going to be the same again, or did she say that to you? One of you said it, didn't you?
Well, either one of us could, and we never were the same. I've heard some reporters ask the astronauts if going to the moon had any impact on their life. And I can't for the life of me understand how they could possibly say that it really didn't change my life.
Did you never think of asking to be released, of getting out and saying, this is no good, I can't do this sort of thing?
Well, I had somewhat of a taste of what the public life might be like following my first space flight in the Gemini program. And I had vague thoughts that if I had the choice, I would just as soon go on the second lunar landing flight rather than the first. But as it turned out, I had no choice. By the time that we were selected for that mission, it would not have been fair to the space program or to other people for me to make any choice about my own selfish desires.
Do you think if you had gone on the second lunar landing, your life might have turned out rather differently?
I don't think the trauma of readjustment would have been anywhere near as great. And to that degree, I think what other changes came later might not have been come about perhaps as soon or would have been as severe, perhaps.
Buzz, tell me about those changes, because after you went back to the Air Force and you became commandant at Edwards Air Force Base, and then trouble started. Now, what exactly did happen?
Well, in looking back on it, I just feel that from the time the mission was over, for the next couple of years, I was in a period of just discomfort that I characterized as depression, or despair, anxiety, apprehension, questioning my own ability to perform. Since then, I've learned to characterize it more as a fear, a concern that I would not measure up to my own standards, that I wouldn't look good in front of people. And I think that that's not something that astronauts alone share. Many people have those same fears, and they may call them depressions. They're periods of discomfort. And it was pretty much straight depression during those 2 or 3 years before I was hospitalized at an Air Force base for psychiatric evaluation. There were periods of excitement when I would travel and meet different people or get wrapped into something that had nothing to do with my job at that point. Generally, the day-to-day activities I didn't care for because I didn't care for the way I was apparently measuring up to my own high standards.
You talk about the depression that you suffered at this time. What form did this depression take?
Well, depression that I experienced was in the form of a fear, a desire to stay inside of yourself, not to go out and talk to people, a very self-conscious feeling, one that would lead you to wanting to stay in bed and not get up at all, to be afraid to open the door and go out and shop in the market, to be very conscious of other people watching you, almost a paranoia. And since then, I've learned that a lot of alcoholics experience this kind of fear and concern and apprehension and share the same self-centeredness. And what it really is a self-directed concern. It's a very inflated ego, but it's directing all of your attention inside. And even though it's so uncomfortable, the way that you get out of this fear and depression is by getting out of yourself, getting involved in activities that slowly get you to start thinking about other people. To the extent that you can begin to help other people, then you can begin to not be so concerned about your own thoughts.
Well, then you sought help, as you've explained, from the psychiatrists, and what did you learn from them?
I'm not sure really what I learned. I learned that it was okay to not be perfect all the time. And that in itself gave me a bit of relief. To having been demanding perfection out of myself and then seeing that I couldn't do that, and then learning that it was okay to do that, and it was also all right to tell people about that.